Today, I thought we would talk about admin, specifically pushback, friction, objections from admin as you're trying to implement the whole idea of practical shooting. One of the most common questions I've gotten so far since I started talking about this stuff on the podcast was, how did you overcome objections from admin, and how did you overcome objections from other instructors? But that'll be a different video. How did you get past all that? How did you overcome the friction, answer the questions, and kind of get to where you could do the things you wanted to do? So I thought that'd make it for an interesting conversation today. The first thing I have to say is I was pretty fortunate when I got brought into the unit that I work in, where there wasn't a lot of friction. In fact, admin was very much on board. They were looking to make this kind of a change, and there was a lot of appetite within the unit and the guys that were already there to make some changes, to modernize the program, to bring things up, make some new additions, bring in some new ideas. So I didn't really have to ice skate uphill, as the saying goes. All I really kind of had to do was educate a little bit, maybe answer some questions and work around some misconceptions or some just lack of knowing, and didn't know what they didn't know, sort of thing. And then that went a long way towards paving the way. But I kind of got a blank check. I did it the easy way. But having talked with a lot of guys, there are a bunch of common concerns that have come up, and and I'll talk through kind of the way I would approach those if I had to, or some ideas that you can bring up that might help to smooth things over, or at least shed some light, give a new perspective, something to talk about, maybe open the conversation with the administration, as opposed to kind of just starting and ending with no, period, full sentence. So the first one that I hear a lot is it's too expensive, costs too much ammo, it's too ammo intensive. We can't shoot all that ammo in order to do that. So what I'll say to that is, first off, everybody's got limitations where they work. Even I do. I don't have everything I want. You're never going to have all the ammo you want, and all the resources, and all the range space, and all the props, and all the time. Like, just you're always going to be having some sort of limitations that you got to work within, and that's just life. And if you sit around waiting for everything to line up and be perfect, well, you'll be sitting there waiting forever. So the first thing I'll say is, don't be afraid to get creative. Work within the constraints you have. It's not an all or nothing proposition. Just because you can't institute all of the ideas you want because of ammo restrictions or space restrictions or resources or props or whatever it is, just because you can't institute all of the changes you want to make doesn't mean you shouldn't do any of them. So get creative, institute what you can where you can, push a little bit here, stretch a little bit there, and kind of institute these changes over time. And that can go a long way towards uh, kind of making some progress. Having said that, there is, well, let's be real. There is a minimum level of investment. There is a minimum number of rounds that have to be shot in order to train someone up to even the lowest level of what anybody would consider core competency in firearms. So there's a minimum number of rounds that have to be considered an investment in your people for training. And so if you're not willing to meet that, then what are we really talking about? At some point, like at some level, there, like, you have to have a minimum investment of time, money, ammunition to meet like a baseline level to develop what we would call like durable and transferable skills. When you're looking at that, you kind of have to ask yourself, like, take a look at your program, and with like honest, real, open-hearted assessment, you got to ask, okay, with what we're doing and the resources that we're using, are we training people to pass a minimum level qualification, whether that's department or state level, whatever, wherever it's mandated from? Are we training to meet that minimum level qualification, and that is the standard we're training to? Or are we trying to train people up to the standard of being prepared for when the moment chooses them, as the saying goes? When the critical incident happens, are we training them to a level where they could perform admirably, to the level that we would be proud and hope that they would perform on the day in the moment, because those are two very different levels of preparation and they require different levels of investment. And I think taking an honest look at which one is actually happening, like regardless of which one you want, which one's actually happening, that can then kind of tell you how wide the gap is and maybe be the beginning for a conversation. Maybe. The other thing I'll say is that like we're training folks up for officer involved shootings, which is one of the most scrutinized events that happen in this line of work. Like it is the biggest microscope that gets put on any singular type of event that happens in the world of law enforcement. There's going to be lawsuits, like almost without exception, regardless of whether it's a great shoot or it's gray or there's some ambiguity that in there. There's going to be lawsuits, or at least there's going to be attorneys involved. And so when we talk about the cost of investing in training versus making payments for settlements, you can buy a lot of ammunition for the cost of like the fraction of one, multi-million-dollar settlement. Will an administrator see it that way? Maybe, maybe not, but it's at least, a place to open a conversation or a part to talk about. In the world of post-Floyd, where a lot of major agencies paid out tons of money for failed to train lawsuits or inadequate training, it's a conversation that's at least worth having. Now, with all that being said, regardless of whether you've got all the ammo you want all the time, all the resources or not, you can still get really creative and work in different methods in your training to stretch whatever resources you have. So let's say you're tight on ammo. How do you stretch that? Well, you can dry fire on a live fire range and use those dry fire reps to expand the reps you get and make the live fire reps better quality. And honestly, even if you've got pallets of ammo, like your armory is full and they're dropping off more pallets of ammo tomorrow, you should still be unloading and doing dry fire on a live fire range, even if you've got all the ammo you need, because the amount that you learn and the amount of feedback you can see when the mistakes are not masked by an explosion going off 2 feet in front of your face is pretty dramatic. And it makes the live fire reps so much more useful, and there's so much more learning that goes on. But if you're tight on ammo, taking a drill and doing 2 or 3 dry fire reps on it to work out the kinks and really focus on and really drill down into, okay, what are we trying to accomplish here? What are the mistakes I'm looking for? Then you load it up, you do 1 or 2 live fire reps, you assess it, then you unload, you do dry fire reps again, then you load it back up, you assess the changes. It's like a mini cycle of a larger version of dry fire at home, evaluate in live fire at the range once a week when you get to go train. It's like a mini version of that. You're just doing it in a much faster cycle, much faster loop. But it's a great way to get more bang for the buck, more learning out of the same amount of ammunition. Another big complaint or kind of pushback that I've heard folks get, especially from like the higher ups, is they don't like the idea of their cops running around, kind of running and gunning on a live range with live guns. Like too much running and gunning, too much running around. It can't be done safely on a square range. So we're just not going to do it. To say that, what I would say to that is, if it's going to happen out on the street in real life, and the job demands that it will, then you'd probably better figure out a way to train it in the square range. Because if you're expecting them to figure it out for the first time live, under stress, having never done it before, and do it well, for real, you're in for a rude awakening. So because the job demands it, we have to find a way to train it on the range. And it's really not that difficult. You can break folks out into relays. You can come up with lots of different ways to work them up and make them safe. You can start with unloaded guns. You can start with blue guns. In fact, it's a great idea to start like movement with no gun at all. We just train the movement piece because something happens when you put a gun in cops' hands. They move around great. You tell them like, hey, I want you to run from here to there, and they can run fine. Then you bring them back and you put a gun in their hand and you're like, I want you to move from here to there. And all of a sudden you put a gun in their hand and they move like broken video game characters, just all kinds of rigid, and they don't know what to do with their hands, and it's just a mess. So sometimes just breaking down the footwork piece without a gun is a great way to start. And then you work them up. You could do blue guns after that, and then you could do unloaded guns, and then finally live fire. Like there's lots of ways to work through it, but because it happens in real life and our training should mimic all of the tasks that we're required to do in real life, we should find a way to train it. So I just don't buy the idea that it can't be done safely on a square range, because if it's required in the job, in the performance of our duties, we've got to figure out a way to train it. Full stop. Another one that I was kind of surprised to hear, because we dry fire a ton where I work and we require our recruits to do it, is that like you can't dry fire at home. You can't require recruits or officers or whatever. You cannot require them to dry fire at home because it's unsafe. And this is specifically applies to like the recruit aspect. Like, hey, we want them to train. We want them to dry fire at home, get more practice outside of the range. But admin won't let us. They won't let them take the guns home. They won't let them dry fire at home. They're afraid something is going to happen. They're afraid they're going to ND through the wall and send around into the next department or whatever. The problem I have with that is like on graduation day, when they leave the academy, they're going to have a duty gun and all of the ammo, all the duty ammo for their guns. So now they're going to be at home with a live gun and real bullets. They don't magically become more competent just because they graduated from the academy. On Friday they graduated. They're not any different than they were on Thursday when they were still a recruit. So we should probably train them up and show them how to be safe in all of the environments, how to work with their gun, and train safely in a dry fire environment, in a dry fire space, so that they don't go home and the first time they try to unload their gun, they have an accident, and now we've got a big issue. So the way we do it where I work is we simply show them. One of the things we do is a dry fire block. We talk about what a dry fire area needs to look like. We talk about how to safely make sure that the gun is unloaded, no ammunition in the area, no distractions in the dry fire area, and here's how you train. And then we expect them, like the requirements are like you will dry fire every day between live fire sessions. Like we will be checking, we'll be evaluating, blah, blah, blah. I'll go more into that in another video on what our dry fire program looks like. But then we lay out the expectations. This is what you're expected to do. You are an armed professional now. You expect you to conduct yourself as such. And here are the consequences if you violate those expectations. And we tell them, like, if you somehow manage to load your gun and you have an ND in your home while you are trying to dry fire, it's probably going to cost you your job. Like, that's just what's going to happen. So those are the stakes. Here is how you do it correctly. Here are the consequences if you don't. Now, be a professional. And it's worked. We haven't had any problems. It hasn't been a non-issue, and we get the benefit of having our folks training every day with their guns. So I don't think the idea that you can't dry fire at home because of liability, I just don't buy it. I think it's a training issue. Don't institute hardware problems for software issues. Another one I hear is that administrators don't like the practical shooting approach because it's speed shooting, and speed shooting's bad. We train our people to shoot fast, and then we're training them to miss, and we're instilling bad habits. And I really push back on this one a lot, because anybody who's looked at body cams of any sort for like the last decade has seen that most officers in most situations are going to pull the trigger more or less about as fast as they can when they're involved in a shooting, regardless of whether they've trained to or not. So we should probably take them there in practice so that the first time they try to do it live isn't when it's for real and the stakes are very high and the liability of the individual and the agency is on the line. So here, an example I like to use is, let's imagine that we took our recruits out to a driving track and we put them on the driving track, and we've got a course set up with all the cones, and we tell them, we're going to drive around this course all day today. You're going to get lots of reps, but you're not allowed to go more than 25 miles an hour. And so all day long, they drive around the course, they drive around the course, they drive around the course, and they don't hit a single cone. So they're clearly outstanding drivers. They've mastered how to drive. Then the first week out of the academy, they're on the street. There's a homicide suspect. He just shot up that school. He got in the car, he drove, and now he's trying to get away. The chase is on to try to get him. And that officer, who's only ever done 25-mile-an-hour loops around this track, is now expected to engage in a high-speed chase for real for the first time, live, when it matters. And how does that story end? We all know how that story ends. Like, it doesn't end well. You can't drive fast if you've never, like, not successfully, if you haven't trained to do it. Well, the same approach is required in shooting, but for decades, law enforcement hasn't trained that way. We've trained the slow, smooth, surprise trigger break, stack all the bullets on a paster, and, as long as you do it slow and smooth and we account for all of our rounds, somehow, when it's time to speed it up in real life, you'll figure it out and it'll work. Well, it doesn't work for driving, and it also doesn't work for shooting. So training our folks to shoot quickly and accurately isn't speed shooting. It's training them to make decisions at the speed of real life. We're training them to process what is happening, what they're doing, what that loop looks like based on like their behavior, what they're seeing, the feedback they're getting on what's happening. Is my input, the things I'm doing, is it effective? Do I need to make changes? Continual decision-making process of, do I need to change the conformation of my sights? Are my rounds landing effectively? Do I even need to still be shooting? Should I be moving instead? Should I be moving and shooting? Do I need to move over there and then start shooting again? All of this ongoing decision-making process is nothing more than decision-making at the speed of real life, which is all we could possibly hope for an officer to do in a critical incident, which is going to be the most scrutinized and high liability incident that single officer is involved in their career. And it exposes the agency to the greatest amount of liability. So if we want them to perform admirably under the circumstances, we should probably train them to do the things that we're asking them to when the day comes, when the moment chooses them. So I think kind of looking at it from those perspectives and talking in kind of framing it in that way, as opposed to it's really cool, or, Instagram said we should, or, all the best competition shooters are doing it, which is true. But if the administration doesn't understand the tie-in between competition and real life, then that's not going to have any real meaning to them. Instead, I would talk or try to open this conversation with them in terms that make sense to them as it appears to the whole agency. Because you have to remember, they're looking out for the agency, like from a 30,000-foot view, like they're trying to protect the agency from liability, and like that's what they care about. So it's like, hey, if we're going to spend money, how does this benefit the agency? Well, having officers that are better prepared, they make better decisions, they are able to land their rounds sooner, shoot less, miss less, make the effective choices and ongoing decision-making processes at the speed at which those critical events happen leads to lower liability for the city or the state or the county or whatever your agency is. Like, all of those things are good. And like helping the administration understand how the goals of like we make our people better and that also makes our agency better kind of go hand in hand. The last thing I'll mention is just a word of caution. I would be very careful about how you open these conversations and how you conduct with your administration. You'll know your folks better than anybody else, and also be very self-aware on whether or not you are the good person to have those conversations. For instance, I'll tell myself a little bit. I am not that person. I get pretty fired up. I get what's called like Bible camp fever. So you get all fired up about the thing that you're really, really into, and then you come back and you want to tell everybody about it. It's like, this is the thing that everybody should be into, and you should be into it as much as I'm into it. And then before you know it, nobody wants to hear about Bible camp anymore. Nobody wants to hear, like, you're just too preachy, and they're just like really turned off by the whole message, even if the message is good. So if you're that person who can come off as overbearing or overexcited or just maybe even overly aggressive, or for whatever like maybe you just don't talk politics the way someone else in your shop does, someone else in your cadre or your sergeant or your lieutenant, have them be the good messenger. You give them the talking points and have them carry the message. Have them be the person who can translate your words into the politico speak that they need in order to talk to the people who make the decisions. I mean, that's just smart, because going up and telling the administrator, knife hand in ready on the ready, and just being like, look, this is how it's going to be. This is what we need to do. And if you don't do this, you're dumb. Like punching them in the mouth, whether it's your chief or your sheriff, your commandant, maybe it's a major, or, captain that runs the training division, whatever it is, right? Just like punching them in the mouth metaphorically with like, this is how it's got to be. It doesn't usually work very well. And if you're the person who tends to default to that, be self-aware and elect someone else to be the messenger. And I think you'll find you might get at least a little bit further down the road and maybe open more doors. It might not be a single conversation. It might be several conversations, but as long as they're still talking and they're still listening and the conversation is ongoing, then it's not a no. And that's a win. That's better than a no. So yeah, those are the most common complaints I've heard, like when I've talked to guys who've called and asked and reached out and said, hey, how'd you do it? I'm sure there's others. If you've got other roadblocks you've run into or something like that, leave them down below. If you got any other questions, let me know. Anyway, I hope that helps. Take care.